Titanic. A ship once believed to be unsinkable collided with a massive iceberg at around 11:40 p.m. on the dark night of April 14, 1912. The impact was so powerful that it shook everyone on board. At first, everything seemed normal on the upper decks. Many passengers didn't even realize that an accident had happened. But deep below the ship, freezing Atlantic water was rushing in rapidly. Captain Edward Smith inspected the ship and discovered that 6 compartments had been severely damaged and were quickly filling with water. After only a few minutes of inspection, the captain realized that saving Titanic was no longer possible. The world's largest and most luxurious ship was slowly heading toward death, and it only had a few hours left. As the situation became more serious, wireless operator Jack Phillips began sending distress signals. In the darkness of the night, those signals reached nearby ships. One of them was the RMS Carpathia. But there was one major problem. The ship was about 66 miles, 107 kilometers, away from Titanic. It would take nearly 3 to 4 hours to arrive. And with every passing minute, Titanic was sinking faster into the ocean. Seeing how critical the situation had become, the crew quickly began preparing the lifeboats. Unfortunately, there were only 20 lifeboats on board. Each lifeboat could carry only about 65 people. That meant only around 1,300 people could be saved, while more than 2,000 people were still aboard the ship. In the confusion during the early evacuation, many lifeboats left carrying only 27 or 28 people. Many passengers still refused to believe the danger was real. They trusted that such a massive ship could never sink. After all, this was Titanic, the unsinkable ship. Around 1 a.m., the front of the ship began sinking rapidly into the water. Water had already reached the rooms, hallways, and staircases. Now people finally began to realize that Titanic was truly sinking, and everyone was desperately trying to find a place in the lifeboats to save their lives. At 1:50 a.m., when the last lifeboat was lowered into the ocean, more than 1,500 people were still trapped on the ship. Panic spread everywhere. Families were being separated from one another. Some people prayed to God, while others searched desperately for their loved ones. Those who knew how to swim jumped into the ocean, but the sea showed no mercy. The water temperature was around -2 degrees Celsius. Some people had already accepted death and were preparing to face it. Meanwhile, Titanic's band continued playing music, trying to calm the fear in people's hearts. Now it had become difficult even to stand on the deck. People were slipping, furniture and luggage were falling into the sea, but still, no rescue ship had arrived. Then, at 2:17 a.m., suddenly all the lights on Titanic went out. The entire ship was swallowed by darkness. Only seconds later, under enormous pressure, the ship split in half with a terrifying roar. The front section disappeared beneath the ocean, while the stern rose high into the sky for a few moments longer. At 2:20 a.m., Titanic vanished forever into the Atlantic Ocean. Of the more than 1,500 people still aboard, some sank along with the ship itself, while many others were claimed by the freezing ocean waters. The temperature of the sea was so cold that most people died from hypothermia within minutes. In the darkness, lifeboats drifted silently across the ocean. The Atlantic echoed with the screams of dying passengers. Some people were injured, some were in deep shock, and many had lost their entire families that night. Everywhere there was darkness. The freezing wind continued to blow. Many people were crying. Some searched the dark waters for their loved ones. Several lifeboats still had empty seats, Yet most people were too afraid to go back. They feared that if too many desperate survivors reached the boats, the lifeboats would capsize. Because of that fear, many boats stayed far away. Slowly, the screams coming from the ocean began to fade, and then everything fell into a horrifying silence. The ice-cold Atlantic had taken almost everyone. Those who survived remained sitting in the lifeboats for hours in the darkness. Around 4 a.m., the RMS Carpathia finally arrived. The rescue crew began pulling survivors from the lifeboats one by one. The survivors were given blankets, served hot drinks, and the injured received medical treatment. When morning came, all that remained were a few lifeboats, massive icebergs, and the story of one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. A few days after the Titanic disaster, the White Star Line sent ships to recover the bodies of the victims. The most famous recovery ship was the CS Mackay Bennett. The ship departed from Halifax, carrying coffins, ice, burial cloths, and supplies to preserve the bodies. When the recovery team reached the disaster site, they found many bodies floating in the ocean. Most victims were still wearing life jackets, which kept their bodies afloat on the surface. One by one, the crew brought the bodies aboard the ship. Some victims were identified through their clothing, jewellery, documents, or personal belongings found in their pockets. But there was a terrible problem. There were simply too many bodies. It was impossible to bring everyone back aboard the ship. So only those who could be identified, or wealthy first-class passengers, were preserved and returned to land. Many other bodies were buried at sea with religious ceremonies, and many victims were never found at all. The deep Atlantic Ocean had claimed them forever. Even today, the story of Titanic is not just about a ship sinking. It is one of history's most heartbreaking tragedies, a disaster the world will never forget.